Hello, everyone. Praise the Lord. I hope you all are doing well. Uh, let's begin our today's class. So, as you all know, that we are at present dealing with the 7th century prophets. So, today we are going to study about Prophet Obadiah. So, let me start sharing the screen so that we will be able to follow the lecture properly. Okay, so as we can see, we are going to deal with Prophet Obadiah, who belonged to the 7th century, or he is known as the 7th century prophet. Okay, so let's introduce him first, or introduce the book first. So Obadiah is the only minor prophet who writes during the exilic period, along with other major prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah. So this is one of the, this is actually not one of the, this is the shortest book found in the Old Testament. It is addressed to the people of Edom. Okay, it's not addressed to Israel. It's not addressed to Judah. It is addressed to the people of Edom, and the prophet denounces their wickedness when the foreigners had entered the gates of Jerusalem. That means when Jerusalem was attacked by the foreigners. Okay, so he denounces the activities of Edom at that time, the wickedness of Edom at that time, the way they behaved at that time. So this book, like the book of Nahum, is also known as, or also called as, the book of hate. So by some scholars, the only difference is that Nahum is about Nineveh, a hate song or a hymn of hate for Nineveh, but Obadiah is a hymn of hate for Edom, the people of Edom. Now let's just quickly get into the book of Obadiah and look at the prophet Obadiah himself. So Obadiah, the meaning of Obadiah is the servant of God, of the Lord. Okay, the servant of the Lord. So Obadiah means the servant of the Lord. This may be the prophet's original name or the real name, or probably it may be the name given to the prophet as the book or the prophet, as the real name of the prophet might have been forgotten. So it's not sure whether the prophet was originally or really the name was Obadiah. So Obadiah is the only minor prophet who, as we have seen, he writes in the period of exile, along with other prophets who are major prophets, that is Ezekiel and Jeremiah. So there are many Obadiahs. Sorry, there are many Obadiahs in the Old Testament. So there are many mentions of many Obadiahs in the Old Testament. But since we do not have any kind of biographical facts about this Obadiah, the prophet Obadiah, so we cannot say that this book can be attributed or credited to any Obadiah from those who are mentioned in the Old Testament. So the name may also be the name of Obadiah, that can also be a pseudonym, that which simply it is used to describe the prophet as the servant of God. So it is possible that probably this was not the name of the prophet, but it is a pseudonym, taken name or adopted name, or the name used simply to denote or to simply describe the prophet as the servant of God. So this book has only one chapter. Okay, this is the smallest chapter, as I've already told you. So this book has only one chapter, and this chapter has oracle about the downfall of Edom. Okay, the downfall of Edom, and the prophet condemns the neighboring nations because they gloated, ruthlessly pillaged Jerusalem after the city fell to Babylon. So when the city actually fell to Babylon, when at the time when Jerusalem was being attacked and it fell to Babylon, so the city of Edom, which was one of the neighboring city, along with the other neighboring cities of Jerusalem or Judah, it actually gloated over and ruthlessly treated and pillaged the city of Jerusalem. So we can see that they treated at that time when Edom or other neighboring cities could have helped the city of Jerusalem or the nation of Judah. At that time, we see that they joined with the opposite with the attackers, and they gloated over the city, and they ruthlessly treated the people of Jerusalem, and they even pillaged Jerusalem after the city fell to Babylon. So it comes soon after Jerusalem's destruction. This prophecy comes soon after Jerusalem's destruction and expresses hate for the Edomites. Okay, so this prophecy or this book actually is expressing hate towards the Edomites, who actually rejoiced when Jerusalem was falling, or when Jerusalem was being attacked and being destroyed. The oracle is powerfully charged with emotions. So there are a lot of emotions found in the oracles or the prophecies that is being said, the words that is coming out of the mouth of Prophet Obadiah. Due to what is the reason? Due to the sibling rivalry between Jacob and Esau and their descendants. So we can see that this sibling rivalry has taken a turn where there is so much of hatred among the brothers, and we see that Obadiah is expressing his emotional turmoil and his emotional sadness and anger in this oracle or in this book of Obadiah, his written book. So the Edomites lived in the mountains southeast of the Dead Sea. The capital was Sela or Petra, and it was perched on a high plateau and was considered invincible. So the where these people lived, Edomites lived, it was a city on the rock. Okay, and it was considered to be invincible or impregnable. That means nobody could attack or defeat them. Obadiah denounces Edom's pride and warns that they will be utterly destroyed. So there will be a day, there will be a time when Edom will be utterly destroyed and the pride will be utterly destroyed. So in the 5th century BC, we see that the Arabs took Edom, and in the 3rd century, we see that the Nabateans took overtook this area and built the city of Petra. Okay, the city of rock or the city of Petra. So Obadiah prophesied the return of Israel to occupy the land, including the former Edomite territory. Okay, so this was the gist of what is found in the book of Obadiah. So let's look into the division of the book before we go into the deeper study of the book of Obadiah. So Obadiah chapter was verses 1 to 4 talk about the indictment of Edom for its pride. Then we have verses 5 to 9. There is the announcement of Edom's day of the Lord. Okay, the day of the Lord. Then 10 to 14 verses, we have the description of Judah on the day of the Lord. And verses 15 to 18, we have a second announcement of Edom's day of the Lord. And then finally, we have verses 19 to 20, where we see the promise of Judah's repatriation is mentioned. Now let's move ahead and let's see what was the reason behind the book. Why was this book written? So it is this book is addressed to the people of Edom, where the prophet is actually denouncing their wicked deeds and the wickedness on one particular occasion when the foreigners were attacking the gates of Jerusalem, or when the siege was being laid, or when the attackers were attacking the city of Jerusalem. It's basically talking about Babylonians. So Babylonians were attacking Jerusalem at that time. This is mentioned in verses 11 to 14. So it talks of this time of the day, which of misfortune, of ruin, of distress, and of calamity. So Obadiah is talking that this time was full of misfortune for Jerusalem. It was a time of ruin, it was a time of distress, and of calamity. So this therefore does not refer for a very brief period. So we can say this is the period that Obadiah is talking about, where it was a period of misfortune, it was a period of ruin, it was a period of distress, and it was a period of calamity for Jerusalem at that time. So we can understand that this cannot be a particular brief moment of time. That was when the raid in Jerusalem took place, as it is mentioned in 2nd Chronicles 21 verses 16 to 17. But probably this was a quite major period, it was a quite major moment or major incident in Jerusalem's history. So scholars doubt that this may be a terrible occasion referred to in Psalm 134, verse 7, when the Edomites wanted the walls of Jerusalem to be raised or demolished. Okay, to their foundation. So there was an incident. There were times when the Edomites were actually trying, and they were praying, and they were, they wanted that the walls of Jerusalem may fall so that they can gloat over the city of Jerusalem and they can destroy the city of Jerusalem. So they themselves wanted to destroy, or were for the destruction of Jerusalem. So this is the time of the fall and the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC. Ezekiel also is reminded of this time when the people of Edom they assisted the killing of God's people at the time of the calamity and looked forward to their final punishment. So we can see that even Ezekiel talks about it and he writes about it, that there was a time when Jerusalem was being attacked by the Babylonians, and it was a horrible time for the people of Jerusalem and the people of Judah. And at that time, we can see that Edom was actually helping the Babylonians, or he was helping. They were helping the attackers of Jerusalem. Uh, and they wanted them to be destroyed, and they were actually aiding these enemies and in this time of difficulty, in this time of trouble. And Ezekiel also says that by doing this they were also looking forward to their final punishment. That means by doing this they were definitely moving towards their own final punishment. This mentioned in Ezekiel 35 verse 5. So let's move into the book right now. So verses 1 to 10. So verses 1 to 10, the immediate cause why Obadiah gives this message, or why Obadiah is writing this, is suggested in verse 4. So the verse 4 says, though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. So this is actually talking about their pride, and they feel that they have settled themselves, or established themselves in a high lofty position from where they cannot be brought down, where nobody can reach, and they are invincible now, and they cannot be defeated, they cannot be brought low. So God is telling them, though they have soared high like eagle, and they think that they are among the stars, but God says that He is going to bring them down. So the Edomites are threatened by their former allies or confederates, and Obadiah sees that this is the fulfillment of the previous prophecies that were made by the Lord. So after doing all these evil acts to Jerusalem, there was a time also for Edom that they were also being attacked and they were also being defeated. And Obadiah sees this as a fulfillment of the prophecy that God has already made. So though the words are present in the are in the present tense, um, called these are called the prophetic perfect tense. Okay, so though these words, like this is they are talking about an incident that has passed, the incident that has gone by. So it is talking about, but he is narrating it in the present tense. Okay, he's narrating it in the present tense. Or it can also be that an incident is going to happen in the future. Okay, something is going to happen in the future, but the prophet is narrating in the present tense. So the thing has not yet happened, but he is talking about it as in the present tense. So this is called the prophetic present tense. Okay, so this is called a prophetic present tense. That means he is talking as if it is happening at the present time, but it will happen in the future. Okay, this is called prophetic present tense. So yet the events have to unfold, yet the events have to take place in the future. So according to verse 1, the nations are being urged to rise against her for battle. Against her means against Edom. So he's saying that nations are rising against Edom and to battle against her. So some of these verses are found in Jeremiah also, but the order is quite different. So Obadiah verses 1 to 4 is also found in Jeremiah 49 verses 14 to 16. Obadiah's verses 5 and 6 are also found in Jeremiah chapter 49 verses 9 to 10. And then Obadiah's verses 8 to 9a are also found, and similar thing is also found in Jeremiah 49 verses 7 and 7b and 22b. So the same things are mentioned, the same words are mentioned in Obadiah as well as chapter 49 of Jeremiah. Okay, so we see that the same things are mentioned over there. So now the problem comes that who copied from whom. So it is not clear whether Obadiah copied from Jeremiah or Jeremiah copied from Obadiah, or both of them copied from an older prophecy. So this is not clear, but what is clear is that they were expecting that this incident or this event is going to be fulfilled very soon. Okay, so as it is a historical fact that by the time the Jews returned to Jerusalem in 538 BC, the Edomites had been driven out of their land by their neighboring Arab tribes. So by the time that the Jewish people came back in the Persian time, when they came back, we can see at that time, sort of Medo-Persian time, when they came at that time, they came back at that time. We can see that the Edomites had already been removed from their home and removed from their place and from moved from their land by their neighboring Arab tribes or neighboring Arab nations. So, thus in verse 7, we can see it is written, all your allies will drive you to the border. So, this suggests that the Arabs were about to drive them out of their own land. Okay, so D.H. Mason suggests in verses 6, 1 to 6 and verse 8 and 11 that it is taken from Jeremiah 49 verses 7 to 16. Okay, but verse 11 alludes the entry of foreigners in Jerusalem, and it assumes that the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC is mentioned, which has already happened in the past. So there are again views whether Obadiah copied from Jeremiah or Jeremiah copied from Obadiah. So it is not clear. So we'll look into some of these things right now. So Ellison, on the other hand, says that if both the passages are read parallelly, that means the verses that we have given about Obadiah and chapter 49 that is talking about Jeremiah, if both these passages are read parallelly, it obviously has some connection. Okay, it has similarities, it has connections, and we can see it in three ways. So it can be seen in three ways. This connection or this relation between these two passages can be seen in three ways. Okay, the first way in which this connection can be seen is that Jeremiah quoted from Obadiah. That is one view, that Jeremiah quoted from Obadiah. So let's see some arguments in favor of this view, and we'll see some arguments against this view. So first, let us see some arguments in favor of this view. So this is the most widely held view, that Jeremiah quoted from Obadiah. So the capture of Jerusalem is mentioned in verse 11. So it is also mentioned in Second Chronicles chapter 21 verse 16f, in about the time that was it was about 843 BC. So if this is so, then Obadiah becomes or happens to be the oldest of all the prophetical books, okay, which explains its primitive picture of the day of the Lord. That means the way the prophets picturize or visualize the day of the Lord is mentioned, is the way that Obadiah mentions about the day of the Lord. So it actually explains the primitive picture of the day of the Lord, as Obadiah mentions, and it is also talks about it also tells us why the position of the book is in the initial books, and then it also tells us why it has been preserved for us till today. Okay, so it tells us actually the importance of this book, if Obadiah happens to be the oldest prophetical book. So its position among the 12, that means the prophetical section or the minor prophets in the Jewish structure, describes that the Jewish scribes actually accepted this book as the evidence pointed to Jeremiah using or quoting from Obadiah. So that is why Obadiah is placed in the initial books, and that's how it mentions that it was written in the earlier times, and Jeremiah took or quoted from this book. So the position in the book of 12, that is the minor prophets in the Hebrew version or the Jewish text or the Jewish scriptures, shows us that probably the book of Obadiah was written quite earlier, and Jeremiah quoted these verses from Obadiah. Now let's look at the argument that is against this view. So this argument against this view is quite cumulative. Okay, so the Edomites behaved in such a way as the prophecy suggests at the capture of the city in 843 BC. Then we can see that why, if it happened in 843 BC and the Edomites behaved in such a way in 843 BC, then why did the author of the Chronicles did not mention about this behavior of the Edomites in his book? Okay, how did the incident pass through the kings. Kings also do not mention about this behavior of the Edomites. Okay, so how did this incident pass through the kings unnoticed and only mentioned it in Second Chronicles chapter 21 verse 16f, and that also little bit of it. Okay, that also little bit of it about plundering and raid, and that's it. Nothing more deeper about it, as if it was just a small thing that happened at that time with Jerusalem. So we can say that because of these things, that Chronicles mentions its impact or its importance, or the kings did not mention about it, it simply means that probably did not take place in the earlier times. Okay, so no other capture of Jerusalem except that of Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC can fit into this picture, which is mentioned about by Obadiah. Uh, for because First Kings 14:25, Second Kings 14 verses 8 to 14 are quite unsuitable for this portion that is being mentioned by Obadiah. So we can see that probably it did not belong to the older times, because the writers of the previous time, the historians of the previous time, or the scribes of the previous time, or the chroniclers of the previous time did not choose to write about it with importance or relevance. So probably this incident did not take place in the earlier times, or the book of Obadiah was not there at that time. The second suggestion that we have is probably Obadiah copied from Jeremiah chapter 49 verses 7 to 22. So this view is not supported much. Okay, the support to this view is not much. Obadiah uses a feminine her in verse 1 for Edom, which is not used anywhere else except by Malachi in chapter 1, verse 4. A.G. Smith, one of the scholars, he says that probably he explains it correctly, and he says that the verb in the feminine indicates that the population of Edom is mentioned here. Okay, so it's not about the city of Edom, it's about the people of Edom. That is why it is mentioned her. That's why we many of the time we mention, when we're talking about the people of some place, we mention it in female. Okay, the land, we mention it in female or feminine terms. So probably that is what A.G. Smith is saying, that probably it is not Edom, but it is the people of Edom that is being indicated over here, population of Edom that is being indicated over here. So this cannot be applied to Obadiah 1, okay, where Edom is being spoken about. So the parallel in Jeremiah 49 verses 14 is also feminine. Okay, but it refers not to Edom but to Bozrah, which is also feminine. So probably Obadiah copied from Jeremiah without altering. So if Obadiah copied from Jeremiah, he just took it, quoted it, and he did not change anything in it, which does not seem appropriate. Okay, so in spite of the difficulties, which leaves it unexplained, means it is just left unexplained why this is mentioned in such a way. The view does not make the capture of Jerusalem referred in verse 11 to 14 in Obadiah, the capture by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, when we know that from Ezekiel chapter 35, verse 137, verse 17, Lamentation 4, verse 21, that the Edomites did behave in that manner. Okay, so because it is not mentioned in many of the places, so it's difficult to explain why these things are happening, why this is why this kind of discrepancies are found. So it should be noted that in contrast to Obadiah chapter 1, Jeremiah 49 verses 7 to 22, which is dated in 605 BC, brings no specific charge against Edom. So we can see that Jeremiah, in the verses in Jeremiah, we can see that Jeremiah does not bring any specific charge against Edom, which because it is talking about an incident that is happening in 605 BC, but Obadiah is talking about an incident probably which is happening in 586 BC. Okay, so that is why we can see that it's again a little bit of difference, because of which we can see some contrast in both the passages. Now let's move to the third point, that is both were quoted from an earlier prophecy. This is also quite a widely accepted view, and probably most of the scholars accept this view. So this possibility, the possibility can be seen from the analogous cases that are found in chapter 2, verses 2 to 5 and 15 verse, and then Micah, that is, or Micah, that is chapter 4, verses 1 to 5. So we can see that similar cases are also mentioned in these chapters, which make it quite different. So it can be possibly taken from other scriptures also. So this view normally assumes that Jeremiah, this view that both might have copied from an earlier prophetic section of prophecy. So the view normally assumes that Jeremiah chapter 49 verses 7 to 22 is not written by Jeremiah. Hence, it does not stand any proper evidence. So when it is not written by Jeremiah, what is the argument all about? Okay, so that means it does not have any evidence, proper evidence, whether it was written by Jeremiah or not. So who copied from whom is just, it's undermined here. So it agrees with the second view of making the capture of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So this means that this theory or this view, it accepts or it stands with the time, or it stands with that this incident that Obadiah is talking about is actually about 586 BC, when Jerusalem was being captured. So thus it can be safely said that Obadiah cannot have been written before this date. So Obadiah writes about 586 BC only. Now let's quickly look about Edomites. Okay, who are these Edomites about whom Obadiah is talking so rashly and so with so much of hatred and with so much of emotional turmoil? So let's look at these Edomites, who these people are. So the Edomites were descendants of Esau. Okay, I hope you remember who is Esau. So Edomites were descendants of Esau, who was the older or the elder brother of Jacob. Okay, Jacob. Uh, yeah, so the struggle between these twins, we know the story of Abraham, Isaac's two sons, twins, Jacob and Esau. Okay, we know that story. So we're going to talk about that story only, because from there only this hatred, uh, the seed of hatred is born. Okay, so the struggle between these twins actually began in Rebecca's womb, and it continued for generations. It did not stop, it just continued forever and ever till the generations. So even before they were born, God informed Rebecca that two nations are in her womb, and two people from within her will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Genesis 25, verse 32. Bible says that the first one came out and he was red. His body was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. His whole body was full of hair, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. Seeing his body, they named him Esau because he was hairy. After his brother came out, with after Esau came out, his brother clinging to his heel or grasping his heel or Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Chapter 29, 25, verse 25 to 26 of Genesis. So this competition, which was which started in the womb, it continued all through their life. Both had the same godly parents and same opportunities, but Esau was only interested in the material things, but Jacob, with all his flaws and all his weaknesses, he was interested in God and his promises. Hebrew chapter 12, verse 16, it calls Esau as godless. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of red stew. From then on, he was nicknamed as Red, which also means Edom in Hebrew. Okay, so Esau means hairy, but because he gave up his birthright just because of a bowl of red stew, so he was renamed or nicknamed as Edom, which is in Hebrew language. So Esau's resentment over his bad decision or his bad bargain turned into hatred for Jacob when Jacob deceived his father and stole the blessings of Isaac, which were meant to be given to Esau, which Esau thought belonged to him. Esau vowed to kill Jacob, and so we can see that Jacob flees to Padan Aram, okay, and then he lives there for around 21 years. So Esau nursed this resentment, this hatred for more than 20 years, till the time when Jacob was away in Padan Aram. We see that this hatred was nursed in the heart of Esau for 20 long years. But when Jacob was returning, God intervened and the two brothers reconciled. But Esau and his descendants were unable to forget or overcome the bitterness against Jacob and his descendants. So Esau, in his midlife, he traveled away from Jacob to find a more secure place or space for his cattle, because he could not live along with his brother and his cattle and everything. So he decided to leave and he traveled away from Jacob for more space for cattle, and he settled in a hill country called Seir. Okay, Seir was a rocky land directly south of the Dead Sea and came to be known as Edom because of Esau. Okay, so militarily they were in a very, very strong position. So they became very proud of their position, and they became very self-confident of themselves. So 300 years later, this hatred surfaced when, in response to Moses' polite request to pass through their land, they refused and even threatened them. So we can see Numbers chapter 14, verse 21. It is written that when the brothers crossed, okay, when the Jews crossed, when the brother crossed their land, they should not harm their brothers. It is mentioned over there. You can go through Numbers chapter 20, verses 14 to 21. There are some things that Moses has written over there to be polite to the brothers. Okay, but these Edomites, they refused to be polite and they did not allow them to enter into their land, and they stopped their path. And even we can see that these Jews and these Hebrews, they told them that we will just go through the path. We will not look to the right, not to the left. We will not go to their field. We will not do anything. We will not talk to anyone. But then we can see that these people, these Edomites, did not allow them, because of which this enmity increased. So these people had to take another path to go to their land when they were going to the promised land. Okay, so they when they were going to the promised land, these Edomites did not allow them to cross through their land. So the Hebrew people had to take more deviations to enter into their promised land. So these were some of the reasons why their hatred became or increased more and more. So then around 1042 BC, after around 700 years of the prophecy, when it was told that Esau is going to serve Jacob, David conquered the countries bordering and he bordering with his kingdom, and he united the monarchy of one of which was Edom. Okay, he also captured that, and he united it with his country or his kingdom and made them to pay tribute. So David made the Edomites to pay tributes. Okay, so after 146 years passed, the men of Seir, that is Edom, they united with Moab and Ammon. Okay, Moab and Ammon to invade Judah. So now these are all brothers, if you can understand. Okay, so Edom, and if you remember, Ammon and Moab, they were legitimate sons of Lot. Okay, so Edomites, who were Isaac's son and his descendants. So we can see Edomites, Ammonites, and Moabites. They joined together to invade Judah against their brother. So Jehoshaphat and the people took this matter to the Lord at that time, and God gave them victory. So now Edom was completely destroyed in it was completely destroyed, and in 847 BC the hostilities broke out once again. So this time Edom and Luibna revolted against the king Jehoram, the king of Judah, and they won their independence. So till now they were paying tribute. After David, they were paying tribute to Judah, but now we see when they revolted against Jehoram, the king of Judah, they won the battle and they won independence, and they stopped paying the tribute. And then we see that the Nabateans, the Arabs, and the Philistines also at the same time attacked Judah and they plundered Jerusalem. So at this time, we can see that all of them together, we can see Edom, we can see Lubna, we can see Nabateans, we can see Arab, we can see Philistines. So all these together attacked Judah and they plundered Jerusalem. So Edom was actually supporting them at that time also. So some Bible scholars say that probably the event that Obadiah is mentioning or talking about is this time, that is 847 BC, probably at this time. Okay, so we can see after 847 BC, sorry. So we can see this was a time when Edom, Edom joined with Lubna, Edom joined with Nabateans, Edom joined with Arabs, Philistines, and they all joined together and treated Judah badly, and they plundered Jerusalem. So probably this is the period many of the scholars say that Obadiah is talking about in his prophecies. Then after this, we can see that Edom set up their own king after this, and the independence lasted for around 50 years, which is mentioned in Second Chronicles chapter 21, verses 8 to 16. Later on, we see that the king Amaziah attacked Edom and took Selah, its stronghold, and killed 10,000 men. Okay, so we can see this enmity continues, this hatred continues. So Amaziah, king of Judah, now he attacked Edom and took Selah, the capital, and its stronghold. It was its stronghold. It was its fortress in Selah. So it took Selah, its stronghold, and killed around 10,000 men at that time, which is mentioned in Second Kings chapter 14 verses 7 and Second Chronicles chapter 25 verses 11 to 12. But then we can see that Judah could not conquer or subdue Edom after that. Okay, so we can see that there was a prophecy that God had made for Edom. So God kept that promise to Esau, which was mentioned in the blessings when Isaac mentioned Isaac was blessing Esau. At that time, there was a blessing that God gave to Esau at that time, which was that you will live by the sword and you will serve your brother. So this portion has gone now, that they were serving their brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from your neck. Okay, so God says there will be a time when your brother, that is Jacob and Israel and his people, they will be, they will be ruling over you, and you will have enmity among yourselves. But there will be a time when you will grow restless. Okay, then things will just reach their peak and climax, and you will overthrow their yoke. Okay, you will remove their kingship, or you will remove their power from yourself, or command from yourself, and you will throw them away. So it is mentioned in chapter 27 verse 40 of Genesis. Next, we see that these Edomites were rejoicing over Jerusalem in 586 BC, and soon after, we can see that Obadiah prophesied about all these things, and it was fulfilled when he was prophesying about the punishment of Edom, that they will be destroyed. And we see soon after Obadiah pronounces these prophecies, we can see that it was fulfilled, and we see that the Nabateans, who were the earlier allies of Judah, they drove them out of Judah, or sorry, they drove them out of their own land. Okay, so they were so we can see that Nabateans were the people whom Edomites had joined with against to fight against Judah. Okay, so now these allies, that was Nabateans and Edom, so these allies, the allies, Nabateans, they themselves turned against Edom, and they drove them out of their land. So it seems that the Edomites cooperated with the Chaldeans in the captivity of Judah. So probably it is mentioned that now the Edomites, they joined hands with the Babylonians when Judah was being captured, and and that was the reason probably why these Edomites, they were allowed to settle in the southern Canaan, after the Jews were taken away from there into captivity. So it is assumed that probably that when Chaldeans, or when the Babylonians were attacking Judah to take them into captivity at that time, these Edomites, they were helping and supporting and assisting these Chaldeans to do that. And that was the reason why the Chaldeans allowed the Edomites, to live in the southern Canaan region, where the Jews were taken away from there into captivity. So they prospered there for several years. So we can see that the Edomites prospered in the land of the southern Canaan for many years, for many centuries, till the Maccabees actually subdued them. Okay, so in the intertestamental periods, we see that the Maccabees, they come and they subdue that region, and they force them to conform to the Jewish law and Jewish rituals. So Edomites were settled there in the southern Canaan, and we can say that in the intertestamental period, these Maccabees, that is Jewish people, they forced them to conform to the Jewish patterns and the Jewish law and the Jewish rituals. After this, we see that they become a part of the Jewish nation. So these Edomites, they become a part of the Jewish nation, and the Greeks and the Romans called this province of southern Canaan as Idumea. Okay, they call this province as Idumea because Edomites were living there and they were now following the Jewish traditions and all those things, and because of the Maccabees. So we can see that now the Greeks and the Romans called this province of the southern Canaan as Idumea. So Edom's history was one of the most violent till the end. Okay, they were always violent till the end. And the hatred for the Jews was one of the reasons why we can see that the Romans used them. The Romans used the Edomians or the Herods over the Palestinians. If you can remember about the New Testament, that in the time of Jesus and in those days, Herods were ruling. Okay, Herods were ruling. So who were these Herods? Herods were appointed by the Romans to handle their territories. Okay, to handle their regions. So Romans used Edomians, that is Herods. Herods were Edomians. They basically belonged to Edom. Okay, so they basically belonged to the tribe of Esau. Okay, so we can say that Romans took Herods and they placed them over the Palestinians. Okay, over the Canaanites or over the Jews, over the Hebrews. Okay, so we can say they knew about this enmity between the Edomites and the Hebrew or the Jews. So what they did to control the Jewish people, the Romans used the Herods or the Edomians to as head or the leader or a ruler over this Palestinian region. So Herod the Great, we can see some examples over here of the cruelty of Herods because of the enmity over the Palestinians or the Jewish people. So Herod the Great, who was partly Edomite, killed infants in Bethlehem. Herod Antipas beheaded John the Baptizer. Herod Agrippa too executed Apostle James. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Edomites were absorbed by the Arabs and they disappeared as a group of people. So after the 70 AD, we can see that Edomites suddenly disappeared from the earth and they just, were absorbed among the Arabic nations. Archaeological discoveries in Petra confirm that they probably worshipped idols. Second Chronicles chapter 25, verse 14 to 15 and verse 20. It also talks about it. So their practices were so depraved, and they were they astounded the modern civilizations also. And it clearly tells us why God's judgment was probably just upon them. That means why God actually judged them because of their depraved practices and the idolatry and what all they did in their land. Okay, let's move on to the sins of Edomites. Okay, what were the sins of Edomites? Obadiah first gives us an indictment of the Edom for pride. Okay, it talks about the pride of Edom in verses 1 to 4. And then we see there are two prophecies of their doom in verses 4, 5 to 9, and then 15 to 10. 15 to 20. Okay, so we can see about these things now. So Edom's main sin, the major sin of Edom was pride, which is mentioned in verses 1 to 4. So she exalted herself, but God says that I will make you small among the nations and you will be utterly despised. So this is the words of the Lord that he talks about Edom, because she had exalted herself to a great extent and thought herself to be invincible. So Edom's boastfulness made other nations to hate her and eventually led her to fall. Okay, because she was so proud, because she was so boastful, that the other nations began to hate her and they eventually attacked and defeated, and eventually she fell. So let's look at the 5 reasons that can be seen about her pride. Firstly, she took pride in her position. Okay, she was proud of her position. Edom was proud of her supposed invincibility. That means she thought she cannot be destroyed. Her position of defense, her military might, and her politician. So she depended completely upon that, and she thought that she will be invincible. So her people were strong, and actually they were very strong and active. The proof is that they climbed the steep mountains. Okay, they climbed the steep mountains and made their homes in that. So those mountains are made of rocks, it is rocky. Okay, so they climbed those rocky mountains and they made their homes in the caverns. Okay, so they dug or they broke these rocks and dig it deep, and they made their homes in the caverns of these mountains. and in these canyon walls, okay, they made them their houses in that. It was a difficult task, and only people who were strong enough could do that. So in Petra, still we can see that there's large carved out dwellings are still there in the Rocky Mountains. So Edom boasted, "Who can bring me to the ground?" They defied all the power of the world and even eternal God. So they were challenging God that even God cannot bring them down. But everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Luke 14, verse 11. God heard their boasting and he answered, "You boasted against me? I heard it. I will make you desolate." Ezekiel 35, verses 13 to 14. Edom's problem is Edom's problem is the same of that of the humankind down the ages, from the time of Adam to the angels, and even today we can see that human beings struggle with this problem of pride. Let's move ahead with the second sin of pride that they had, second reason of pride that they had. So they took pride in their wealth. Okay, they took pride in their wealth. First was position, now it is wealth. So many nations envied the wealth of Edom. So these were not all fake pride, they were proud because they actually had those things. They were actually in a strong position. Now we can see that they were actually quite rich. Okay, so many nations envied the wealth of Edom. Part of her land was desert, but she also had well watered valleys. Iron copper mines were there at Asian Gibber, and trade routes from by the sea, by the land and by the sea made her actually rich. So every trade route crossed through her, and they did trade and they sold their copper and iron, and actually they became quite rich because of that. So one of its routes from Asian Gibber went to Damascus, one to Egypt, providing profits from trade and taxes. So when anything crossed by them, they took taxes. Okay, so Edom traded with Syria, Assyria, India, Egypt, Arabia, and Africa in those days. Verse 5 gives us Obadiah's vision for Edom being plundered and losing all her wealth. So Obadiah tells in his vision that the wealth that she's so proud of will be plundered and she will lose all the wealth that she has. So people will hide their treasuries, but the people of Edom will hide their treasuries, but the enemies will search and find and loot. So the enemies will come, they will search, find, and they will loot. The Edomites, though they have hidden their treasuries. One famous city that was pillaged was Petra. Okay, Petra in Greek is and Petra is in Greek and Sela is in Hebrew, which means the rock, which was the fortress, which was a stronghold of the Edomites. So it was pillaged, it was completely destroyed. It seems it seems that it was impregnable and unconquerable fortress, but it was conquered. The Nabateans knew that it is a rich trading center. Okay, the Nabateans, that means who were their allies, Edomites' allies. Okay, the Nabateans, they knew that they were very rich. Okay, they were very rich, and this Edom was a very rich trading center, and there was a lot of wealth stored there. So even today we can see that the Arabs call one of the temples in Petra as the treasury. So there is one temple in Petra. Now we know that Arabs have conquered it and they live over there. So we can see that there is still one temple which is called treasury, so which means that there was so much of treasure in the land of Edom at that time. So this wealth, which was Edom's pride, it attracted many robbers in Obadiah's vision, and Obadiah says that they will be looted and they will lose all their wealth, and it did happen. The third thing that they took pride in was their allies and friends. Verse 7 shows us that Edom's friends and allies were another source of their pride, and they turned against her. Okay, so we can see that her allies and her friends, they themselves turned against Edom. Arabs were her closest ally. They jointly traded against Judah. Psalm 83 verses 5 to 6 tells us about this. So they broke and ate bread together. So when they break and eat bread together, they dine together. It simply means that they have a peace pact between them. They have a peace treaty between them. That means they will not be angered by each other. They will not have aggression with each other. They will not, break this peace. They will not go against each other, and they will live in peaceful terms as brothers. Okay, so they broke bread with each other. So they had that kind of relationship initially. Then we see Moab and Ammon and other countries with whom they traded. They had also been their allies. Gaza and Tyre sold slaves to her. We can see in Amos chapter 1, verses 6 to 9. But Edom's friends and allies betrayed her. We can see that these friends that we are talking about, the Arabs, the Ammon, the Moabites, and the Gaza, the Tyre, they all actually turned against her and they betrayed her. So she was so blindfolded by her pride that she could not see the conspiracies that were developing in the minds and the hearts of her allies. And she could not see this destruction coming to her through her own allies and friends. So her own allies and friends actually betrayed her and destroyed her and loaded her completely. The fourth thing that she took pride in was her politicians. Obadiah chapter verses 8 to 9, it shows us that she trusted in her wise men, her politicians, leaders, advisors, and military strategists. These men, it is not I'm again saying these are not fake or farce things that Edom was proud about. They were really good in these things. They were really excellent in these things. They were very wise men in those times. So the men of Mount Esau or Edom, or the men of Seir, they were known as wise men. They were known for their wisdom and knowledge throughout the world. Okay, so they were recognized as wise men. These men of Edom, these men of Mount Seir, these men of Mount Esau, they were actually recognized all through the world as wise and knowledgeable men. Okay, we can see examples in the Bible itself. Eliphaz, if you remember, one of Job's friend, he was one of the wisest friend that Job had. Okay, so he's known for his wisdom, and he belongs to Edom. Then we also have the Herods. Okay, Herods were not foolish. They were schemers, amazing schemers. They were ruthless statesmen. They were men of worldly wisdom, but without ideals, which could have made them truly great. So if these men who were so wise and knowledgeable, if they had ideals, okay, if they had proper ideal system, they probably could have been truly great men. While natural wisdom can be used for God's glory and helps to make it better world, helps to make a world better, yet all true wisdom comes from God, and He encourages us to ask for that wisdom from Him. Okay, worldly wisdom definitely is a tool for God and in His hand to make this world a good place, a better nation, and He can use it for His glory. But the true wisdom comes from Him, and we should ask Him for wisdom, which is we can see in James 1:5. He says that ask and He will give His wisdom to you. So knowledge and wisdom without God cannot protect nation or individual from His judgment. So we have to understand that though they were wise, they were knowledgeable people, but they were destroyed because that knowledge, that wisdom did not come from God, and it did not depend on God. So it could not protect them from judgment. The last thing that we see that they took pride in was their military power. Obadiah 9 speaks of her trust in the warriors. Teman was probably the capital of Edom and a strong center of defense. It was a very strong center of defense. Okay, military place. So the term mighty one, as we can read, mighty one or warriors in NIV, is usually used for scriptures in the scriptures for outstanding military strategists or outstanding military leaders who can fight very well. So these mighty men. Okay, so Edom was also known for its mighty power or military power. The warriors of Teman had inspired fear in other countries. Jeremiah 49 verse 16, we can see that these men of Teman were actually, it actually employed, or it actually feared the people, made the people fearful of other countries. So they were scared of these men of Teman who were very cruel, who were very powerful militarily. Edom was proud and thought no one would dare to attack her. She trusted in her own military strength, but the day would come when her soldiers would be slaughtered and the people left defenseless and without hope. before the invading army. So we can see that it took pride in its position, it took pride in its wealth, it took pride in its we can say friends and allies, it took pride in its politicians, it took pride in its military power. But what happened? They were challenging God, and God actually took the challenge quite seriously and he destroyed them. As seen above, the main sin of Edom was pride, but it also had other sins. The other two sins were carelessness of spiritual values and long standing hostility. So they were very careless, they were very careless about the spiritual value, as we see in the life of Esau. Esau was not at all oriented towards spiritual strengthening. He was only about materialistic things or worldly things. So they were very careless as a character of Esau. And the same with Edomites were very careless about their spiritual values. They were very worldly. Thirdly, we can see that they had long-standing hostility with their brother. So these three sins: pride, we can say careless attitude towards spiritual values, and then the long-standing hostility with their brother were the reasons for which God actually judged Edom. In verses 12 to 14 in Obadiah, we see that when Jerusalem was conquered by her foes, the Edomites were very glad and they went into the city and looted it and they helped to catch the Jews who were escaping and they handed them over to the Babylonians. Okay, so instead of saving them and protecting their brothers, they caught the people who were trying to escape and they gave them back or handed them back into the hands of the Chaldeans. So, this hostility against her brother led her to the fall. Lastly, let's see about what Obadiah has to tell us about the day of the Lord. Finally, Obadiah reflects on a more distant future. So, day of the Lord is always a distant future. Okay, so this all was talking about at that time, which was taking place, a little bit of future. But now we're going to talk about the day of the Lord, which is future. In verse 15, he talks about it. He says it will not only affect Edom, but also the other nations. So, this day of the Lord is not only for Edom, but it is also for the other nations. In a pictorial language, actually, he calls the day of the Lord as the wrath of God that these nations will be drinking of in verse 16. And then the day of the wrath of the Lord, the day of the Lord is also like the wrath of God, that is that will burn them with fire. So it is the wrath of God that these nations will drink. Okay, it's something like acidic. Okay, they will drink and they will destroy themselves, and it will be like a fire. It will be like fire. So the day of the Lord will be destructive for Edom and other nations. In terms of Jacob's descendants, he says that though they were scattered and exiled in many places, they will return to Mount Zion. So on the day of the Lord, they will return to Mount Zion, verse 2021. And all this will happen so that the kingdom of so that the kingdom be the Lord's. Okay, so that the kingdom of the Lord may be established. Okay, everything will be the Lord's. So that's what he's talking about. So for him, the day of the Lord means the destruction of of Edom and the other nations and the restoration of Jerusalem or the people of Judah to Zion. So this is one of the older way of thinking of the prophets about the day of the Lord. But if you see about the later prophets, okay, who came after him, they talk a lot about the day of the Lord as even for the Jews, even for the people of Jerusalem, even for the Judah people, that their sins will be judged. Okay, that their sins will be judged. So this change, the day of the Lord, the concept of the day of the Lord changed later on, as we can see. So that is why it is said that probably Obadiah would have been written earlier because of the way he understands the day of the Lord, which is quite older way of understanding, the primitive way of understanding the day of the Lord, that other nations will be judged and Jerusalem or Judah will be restored. That is the day of the Lord. But the later prophets talk about even Judah being judged because of their sins. So Obadiah presents both parts of God's promise to his people, both material and spiritual blessings. So he talks about both the parts, material as well as spiritual blessings, about the promises of the God that God is going to bless them materially and spiritually also. So restoration to the land and deliverance from the sin will come to Israel. So deliverance from sin will bring holiness back to Israel. Okay. So when they will be delivered from their sin, holiness will come back to Jerusalem throughout the land. Okay, Jerusalem will be free from all kinds of heathen defilements and practices. So this deliverance is actually the spiritual terms. Okay, and their restoration is actually material terms. Okay, deliverance is spiritual term, and restoration is material term. That is, they will be coming back to their own land. So this blessing, or the day of the Lord, will bring blessings to Jerusalem in two ways, in both ways, spiritual as well as material. Material means they will be restored to their land. Spiritual means they will be delivered from their sin. Now, history tells us that during her captivity, Israel was actually purged. Israel was purged of her idolatry, and God brought them back from purging when He brought them out of a Babylonian kingdom into the land of Judah or Jerusalem. So we can see through the judgment that God brought upon them, through the captivity that God brought upon them, they were purged from their sins, and now they are going to be restored in Zion. So, this exile, which is mentioned in verse 20, these exiles returned to possess the inheritance once more. So, they will come back and they will possess their land and their inheritance once more. This is the blessing from God. This is the day of the Lord. So, they came back. We can see that they came back. They did come back in the future to worship God and be his people once again. So, this is the vision of the day of the Lord by Obadiah, where he talks about other nations, Edom and other nations, being judged as if they're going to drink the wrath of God and they're going to be burnt with fire. And the second part of the day of the Lord is the deliverance of Judah or Jerusalem or the people of the Jewish people, and their deliverance and their restoration. So, this is the day of the Lord that Obadiah talks about. And he ends his book, or the prophetic book, over here. So this book was basically, according to this book, we can see that he's talking about Edom. He has a hatred for Edom. The country has a hatred for Edom because they, being brother, they did not treat their brothers well. Edom did not, or Esau, the people of Esau did not treat the people of Jacob well, and because of that, they were judged. Because of the cruelty, because of their attitude, because of the behavior towards Jerusalem at the time of at the time of the calamity, at the time of the destruction. This brought judgment upon the Edomites, and this is what the whole book of Obadiah is talking about. Okay, thank you for attending this lecture. I believe that this is quite helpful for you, and as you all are studying about your prophetical books. So, God bless you and study well, study hard. Thank you.